So if we embrace the hybridity and kind of the ability to actually think about these not as independent things, technology and human beings, we don't necessarily want to like, well, let's look at this as together. How do we see the world differently? And how do we actually come at, and how do we intentionally design for when that comes together with more intention for different times and places in our lives? Second is really around tracking and thinking about tracking the evolution of this transformation. Right? In the next few decades, there's all the sci-fi talk about everything that's going to go on in the sentient world that we're going to live in, and that'll be interesting and it'll be exciting. But I think we need to track and understand kind of what we're doing as we can continue to transform.
Hi everyone, welcome to Design Drives, where we explore why, how and what design and designers are driving forward. The mission is to interview the most forward-thinking designers and innovative creators on the planet to inspire and help you to reach your full creative potential and to make a positive impact in the world. In the episode, I had the pleasure to chat with Scott Robinson, founder and CEO of FreshForm, a customer and user experience agency based in San Diego, but he's also the president of the Design Forward Alliance. With Scott, I chat about how human-centered design is changing as humans evolve, but also the environment of humans becomes increasingly technological. We also dive into the difference and intersection of customer experience design and employee experience design. Further, Scott does play a key role in the context of Design Capital 2024, which will be a collaboration of San Diego and Tijuana in Mexico. In the episode, we'll learn about what makes the region special and unique. I hope you enjoy the episode. All right, I'm here with Scott Robinson. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
So really looking forward to talking to you about San Diego and being actually the World Design Capital of 2024, all of that process that happened there. And then of course you have a lot of experience in design leadership, managing innovation projects, design thinking, and I think also very interesting points of view on where human-centered design is going, considering also technology and the evolution of that. So really looking forward to chat with you about that. But it would be really great for the audience if you can just give some more context about yourself, how it all started out for you as a designer.
Yeah, well, I come from a background of traditional graphic design, and really this is late 90s, went through kind of formal education in graphic design and went through Web 1.0, worked at a startup, Idea Lab startup, and that was fantastically a failure in a great way. I learned a ton. I started FreshForm, my company that I own now, in 2001. And over the last 21 years now, we've been kind of evolving the way that we think about design, the way that we think about experience design in at large. And we've done everything from experience strategy to product design to various digital experiences, and kind of evolving that into kind of hybrid experiences. And today, FreshForm is an innovation and experience design consultancy. We're here based in San Diego, but we're distributed, and spending a lot of time with some amazing clients that we have today. So,
what are the usual industries that you're covering with your projects?
We're really industry agnostic. However, we've kind of fallen into a lot of technology, a lot of software as a service businesses. We're mostly mid-market and large enterprise focused, but we spend most of our time these days in life sciences, medical devices, the experiences that may have a digital component, but also a physical element, and working also with consumer electronics as well. So it's spectrum. Over the last 20 years, we've really touched on every industry possible. Right now, we're really focused on those particular industries and looking forward to seeing kind of what we can do and really helping those industries and those clients that we're really focused on now. That has been an interesting kind of process where we've spent a lot of time for a period of the 20 years in higher education. We did a fair amount in higher education learning and growing kind of with universities, world-class Johns Hopkins University. We've done work with a variety of different small liberal arts schools and across the world. And then University of Washington, we did an international focused design, engineering, and innovation program that was binational, which was fantastic. It was really interesting, called the Global Innovation Exchange, sponsored by Microsoft. And so over the years, again, we've touched on all these different industries and seen all of that. And then really kind of our space right now is how do we enhance customer experiences, regardless of the industry that we're really focused on. But we do have a fair amount of experience right in the patient experience, the consumer experience, the user experience on software, and in that realm. So it's all fascinating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a nice thing of a designer working specifically in a consulting setup like you're doing. You can tap in so many industries, right? And really learn a lot. Basically, with every project, you sort of like on your way to learn about a complete new topic that you don't know about yet. And I think that is something great about working in that setup.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'll just kind of add on to that is that we just started a new relationship with company called Illumina, which is a global genomics company that really kind of pioneered the ability to sequence the human genome. And Illumina is really kind of putting together the ability to understand and personalize medicine across a variety of different industries and segments. But I don't have a degree in genomics. But what we do is we bring this curiosity to any industry that we're kind of going into. And we're digging in, we're understanding kind of the dynamics, the history of the organization, the industry as it's evolving, and bring a fresh pair of eyes to the conversation. So, I don't know what in the next 10 years what new industries will kind of evolve, but we're open for the challenges that will come with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think initially before we started the episode, we were actually chatting a little bit about the friction of talking to new clients. I mean, also speaking from your side, maybe as a founder and manager of a design consulting firm. There's always some friction in terms of like getting in touch maybe with new businesses, etc. And something you guys have been doing is sort of like adding one format that maybe makes that a little bit easier. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some friction that maybe you have experienced in all of your years there when sort of like building relationships in that context and actually taking a relationship actually to like a bigger scope and a bigger project, and how you handle all of that? And specifically also how like that offering that you created sort of fits into that bigger picture.
Yeah, what you're referring to really is the way that we frame it is the acceleration workshops. And if we look at any organization that we're talking to, any conversation that we're in, there's some element of a sticking point, a challenge or a problem worth solving. And one is that not always are those problems obvious, but two, when you're in the grind on a daily basis in an organization, whether it's a culture that's thriving or a culture that's maybe needs a little bit of support or help, you may need some help getting unstuck. And so we developed more of a model around acceleration, getting unstuck quickly. And that's just using a lot of the principles in design thinking, the ability to bring teams together, cross-disciplinary teams, to have the conversations that are worth having, to be able to understand and align around a problem, and then define, how best to be able to unstick from that particular area so that you can move and you can practice different ideas, solution sets, and get kind of cross-organizational buy-in from in a quick fashion versus some of these things that may have been built up over years. It's part design therapy, it's part design thinking, and it's part design doing. So I think you can bring all of those things together in a short time frame in an undaunting way. It's not an annual contract or anything like that. What we can do is you can focus on a single thing that really kind of opens the doors and conversations. We feel that one, it builds trust with our clients, and it builds trust within the organization itself. And then from there, we now start to look at the broader customer experience and areas that we might think that might add value. There may be areas of innovation, there may be areas of just pure optimization of an experience. But at that point, we have a little bit of information and some knowledge on understanding kind of what's going on within an organization and where we might be able to help.
Yeah, it's a great way to sort of like, discover opportunities to scope out potential projects as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or maybe just, discovering areas for innovations where the business itself wants to go and internally as well, right? So yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I think it has nothing to do with sort of more traditional sense of what design also does. More the craft aspects was very much just about the strategy and applying the methodologies, right? I think it's super interesting. You also wrote an article in recent time, which was about hybrid design. And we can link that article also to the show notes. But I think it would be interesting to hear maybe a summary of that from your side in terms of what exactly you mean with hybrid design, and how does that influence the future of the designer?
Yeah, we've had a lot of interest from the article. It's been interesting, and it was co-authored by a colleague of mine who comes from an anthropology background. So we had this interesting kind of cross section of looking at the world, understanding kind of where we are kind of in this particular time frame, and what we might do differently in the ways that we think about design. And we had a lot of conversations internally. We've had a look at some of the things that what kind of frame out what we call unintended consequences through design. And it's unfortunate, as designers, we never aim to create kind of these consequences or these impacts that negatively impact humanity or society at whatever kind of angle that you look at it. But it happens. And so what can we start to do to understand and think about designing for a future in which we now are looking at a couple different perspectives? And when we talk about hybrid, I want to kind of define hybrid first. And when we think about hybrid-centered design, the article kind of goes into depth here, but it really kind of covers a couple different things. But I think, first of all, a hybrid is you and I, right? Today we look at, we're augmented. We're no longer purely human beings anymore, and that comes in the opportunity of saying, I can pick up my phone, I can answer any question, I have the data in my palm, I can now understand this data is going to actually now be predictive and help supportive of and anticipate a lot of my needs. And so me as a human being, I'm no longer just purely a human, unless I go and I kind of have a little tech vacation or anything like that. But what we do is if we start to look at that in an optimistic way instead of a pessimistic way, it gives us an opportunity to actually see the world and design the world for an increasing kind of level of hybridity. It really takes in, first, we should be thinking about highlighting hybridity. It's okay. It's okay that we're augmented now. We're not, we're going to leverage more and more technology. And my daughter, who's 15, is completely immersed. My son, the same way. It's just the next generation is not going to know anything different. And so how do we think and predict and can consider what that type of impact will be? So if we embrace the hybridity and kind of the ability to actually think about these not as independent things, technology and human beings, we don't necessarily want to let's look at this as together. How do we see the world differently? And how do we actually come and how do we intentionally design for when that comes together with more intention for different times and places in our lives? Second is really around tracking and thinking about tracking the evolution of this transformation. Right, in the next few decades, there's all the sci-fi talk about everything that's going to go on in the sentient world that we're going to live in, and that'll be interesting and it'll be exciting. But I think we need to track and understand kind of what we're doing as we can continue to transform. So we look at this is that if we look at us as human beings, we're under revision all the time. We're kind of, we're learning, we're growing, we're kind of evolving. So what are we doing to now think of that as a component to say we're at a different level now? We have different things, we have different systems at our disposal. So what can we do to maybe think about that? And then the last is like, it's not us versus technology or us versus the machines, right? Is that how do we then think about a world that flourishes together? How do we actually think about a way in which technology can kind of grow in a responsible way, as well as humanity actually grow and we evolve and be okay with elements of technology kind of coming into our world and our life? I'm not talking Elon Musk level, kind of embedded technologies in our brains, which may or may not come, but it's still something in which what we can do is we can actually look at us coming together in a good, positive way. And again, I'm optimistic about the future. No Terminator kind of, forefront in my mind, but, I think that we need to be cognizant and responsible for the ways that human beings and technology come together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could see the human as the longest and most iterative design process of humanity, right? And it's kind of interesting to look at it that way. It's a collective process. We're all doing it together. It's not a one designer. And so we're all shaping that future together. And
Absolutely.
it's very interesting because it's a lot of different influences that sort of like shape that. And I think your aspect about augmentation, I think it's relevant as well. I mean, when did it start? Probably when people had to, use the stone to draw something on a wall. That we start to use artifacts to augment our abilities as humans. And of course, as we, made fire, and I think the big shift, was then when suddenly you had the telephone that you used to have at your home, and you could just suddenly now take it with you in your pocket. And now I think technology was really with us the whole time. And I think this was probably like a turning point where we kind of went into sort of like a stronger step of that sort of like hybrid human experience. And I think there are just incremental, smaller steps that kind of going to that direction. But I think super interesting to kind of reflect on that.
To touch on that, the stone draw, the picking up a stone and kind of carving it into the walls and being able to have the cave paintings and drawings and things like that. It was a way to interestingly augment memory, right? Is that how do I actually remember this particular thing and pass that down for generation to generation? So what I'm really fascinated about as well is that how do we capture and understand memory in today's sense, in which is our memory actually being pulled out because we have the ability to kind of access things through technology, or is our memory actually getting smaller as far as our human brain? If you remove the technology, I can't remember anything these days, so I think it's a matter of interesting in the ways that people are truly kind of shape-shifting in a way to think about what we might become. But I think it goes all the way back, like you said, is that we've been augmenting and utilizing tools for forever. So as far as long as I can remember and kind of look back in the history books, it's absolutely fascinating to like start to look at those little components coming into today's life. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, also how this, like you said, is changing humans, right? So these abilities, they of course have influence on our evolution, and there will probably be some content for a future episode to look into these kind of consequences. Talking a little bit about, employee experience and customer experience, as I understood also from you, sort of like being two aspects that you're very passionate about. Can you talk a little bit about that and how sort of design plays into it, and what are some of like common challenges you're trying to solve, and maybe some differences? How do you design for an employee versus designing for a customer?
It's an interesting question because we do look at it as that you can't have a great customer experience without a great, in at least an intentional employee experience. And I think that there's elements of those things I think that are very, very intertwined. I think they're also very similar, but they're more similar than they are different. And the reason why I say that is that it's still all about people, and if you're designing fundamentally for people and on behalf of people, and you design an experience that provides meaning and value to that individual as a human being, again, hybrid, then you've been successful on a customer level. The differences then that go into place is that can you provide meaning and value to employees along the way? So you're encouraging them, inspiring them, supporting them, and connecting the ways for the employee experience to actually add value to that customer experience. So they're really kind of connected and intertwined. I see it as more unified versus different or disparate. So there's just more orchestration, I would say, behind the scenes as far as backstage employee experience that I would put into context and say, when we're designing an employee experience, it's really looking at and connecting some interesting dots within an organization that oftentimes may feel siloed, and I have to focus on one particular area. But if we can now design an experience that really allows, I always talk about altitudes, and it's like, which altitude are we looking at things, and how should we be as an employee? Do I have enough context? Am I seeing enough of the vision of the organization? Am I designing in a way that I feel valued, and I can provide meaning in my work? And I now see how that impacts ultimately the bigger picture, whether it's the promise that you have to your customers or the mission that you have as an organization. So the experience that you design from an employee standpoint, I think is definitely more of an orchestrated kind of effort. And it's more of a team sport versus a customer experience is more of what I would say an individual activity, but multiple touch points. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but they're very much, it's all about people, and it's all about the ability to provide meaning.
Mm. Yeah, and I see sort of different paths to that, to talk about employee experience within a project. I think if you have the task to, for example, designing your website, you could touch on the topic of not just thinking about the people using the website, but also people like managing the website, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you design a physical product, you can have sort of like a service design approach where we sort of like, you try to map out the whole flow and then think about, what we, traditionally focus a lot on the customer experience, sort of the user experience. And then, but, how on the backside are people actually, dealing with that product and selling it, etc. So really having that big picture towards like your product project. And so I think that's one way to bring in the conversation of the employee experience. Is that sort of like usually how this starts for you? Or is it really that, companies start to set up projects fundamentally and firstly targeting the employee experience and putting that into focus and start basically from there to think about other touchpoints?
The way that we typically are brought into projects and conversations is more about the customer experience. And the reason why, typically, again, organizations are fundamentally trying to build value for the organization and growing, whatever it is that mission is that they have. And it oftentimes starts on the outside. So how do we actually support the customers better? How do we drive more sales, convert more, onboard better? Whatever it is, a part of the customer journey that we're really focused on enhancing. It's more about kind of the outside piece. However, we go back in and saying what we can do on the inside is through great design and the employee experience, we can actually save the company money. We can make the processes more streamlined. We may be able to kind of add value from a productivity standpoint. So there's a variety of different areas that are coupled, but it typically is, let's start with value creation on the outside, and then how do we do value capture on the inside? And so that's kind of how we couple, both of those two things together. But it's really a question of most of the organizations are trying to advance the customer experience first. And it's as I mentioned before, they're very, very tied together. It's not, you can't decouple these things because one can't be done without the other. Employees without customers don't have a job, and customers without employees have a really terrible experience. So I think they're very intertwined, but it usually starts with the customer experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, I've been recently learning a little bit about how Starbucks is doing it, for example, right? And one of the reasons why Starbucks was successful is that they have had that focus on the employee experience early on. And I don't know if that's sort of like an overall focus they have, but at least I was learning about some decisions the founders had to do within the process of starting Starbucks, and sort of like how decisions towards employee experience were benefiting the whole growth of the company. So I think what is so interesting is that, in the end, a company is nothing more than just a group of people, right? So, the more you can sort of like foster that, they're working towards one mission, right? And I'm just wondering, if you think about employee experience, I think easily understand, like in a sort of like product project or like a UX project, sort of like like what would be sort of the way to kind of frame that and kind of bring that in on a conceptual level, right? So we can think about like, how it would impact the employee experience. And then I'm wondering, like, how do you sort of like handle the sort of deliveries of that when it comes to sort of handover? Because you can go very far, right? I mean, you can go into sort of HR processes and like actual implementation and what the actual consequence of that. But I think at some point also there's probably like another stakeholder or sort of role that has to take over that implementation process as you're working from the sort of like consulting side, I assume. Do you have any learnings on that, or do you understand what I'm referencing here?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's as a consultancy, it's really difficult to truly implement an idea or design because again, there's a lot of things that we don't, we're not going to be there on a day-to-day basis. We do embed ourselves a lot of as far as understanding, what our clients are going through, what our counterparts are at the companies that we're working with. What are they doing? What are they dealing with? What are their challenges? What are they, but all of those things, if our agreement is done, what happens? So when we think about that customer experience, can we deliver that? Can we be a part of every step of that? And the answer is no. Unless we're a part of the organism itself, which is a body of people that's constantly there. Our value is delivered through not only understanding the problem, architecting a bit of a solution and a strategy to be able to get there, developing some elements of governance so that we can effectively manage challenges throughout that, and then be able to put mechanisms to measure whether or not the experience is there. And that's kind of where we can find our line in which where we can end our agreements, we can provide valuable service, not only on design, in some elements of implementation, but as far as how do you govern this particular experience? How do we manage it over time? What happens if it changes? What happens if something goes wrong? So I'll give you an example. We're actually helping one of our clients right now with a global design system. And part of that design system is not just, it's connecting different parts of the organization, but it's also the rules of governance to be able to say, how do we make changes to this? How do we evolve it over time? When is the decision points come into play? And how do we do that? We can't be a part of all of those different conversations on a global level, but what we can do is we can put some mechanisms in place to provide some guidance based on our experience that I think can help teams really, answer those challenging problems when they come up. And we can predict a few of those things because we've seen it across industries and we've seen it in a variety of different ways. So the way that I would say is a governance model, or at least some elements of what to consider when it goes into play, that has value on where the conclusion of our relationship is.
Mm-hmm. And I assume one of the challenges, at least like that's my assumption, is when you try to increase the scope, so let's say you work with an internal stakeholder that has focus on, the certain aspect that, you were kind of briefed on, unless it's the CEO that you talk to, or like the founder and so on, like that person kind of manage a certain part of the business. And then if you try to increase the scope, sometimes, innovation can fail very easily by sort of the not invented here syndrome, So basically that's, always challenging from the outside, like also to motivate the internal team, maybe to bring in more stakeholders or to build the bridges, to actually implement it, because, other than that, it's just going to be like a nice idea in the end, which not get taken forward internally because there may be assumptions internally about like why this can't work, or maybe annoyed by the fact that they were not part of that process. So the importance of having your idea being co-authored, I think, right? And then have the co-author kind of take it forward and finish the book, if you want to say so. I think that's another aspect really, I think has to be considered when like working on this bigger scope, like going from customer experience to employee experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you just hit it, is that if it's not co-created, it will fundamentally fail. Even if it's not co-created within an organization and we're not involved at all, even if it's a group of employees that go in to kind of the private room and try to create something and then try to operationalize it within the other organization. We're actually watching this happen at one of our clients right now. And it's a challenge in which, it wasn't designed here. And now what we're trying to do is scale it and operationalize it. And is done in a black box. The co-creation model, we firmly believe in that as a model that has to be put into place. And so the work that we do when we do get in and have conversations, just like you said, is that the employee experience has to be designed and catered really, really closely. Otherwise, it will fail. Like on a website, if the back end of the administration isn't really well designed in that way. We put equal emphasis on making sure the usefulness and usability of an internal used product or service has enough emphasis and focus and is considered and co-created with the team that's going to use it just as much as a customer experience. And we try bringing outside customers to be able to bring that in as well. But that's the true value to being able to do that, is understand designing with people and not just for them.
Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it. So, FreshForm is based in San Diego. And of course, I think we would also love to touch on San Diego being the World Design Capital for 2024 and everything that's happened around that. But maybe you can talk a little bit about also San Diego as an area, Southern California, if you want to broaden it a little bit. And the impact towards design, and maybe some of the aspects maybe the audience doesn't maybe know about sort of that area of the world and how the impact is towards design.
I'm lucky to have been born and raised here in San Diego. So this is a hidden gem. It's often overshadowed by Los Angeles and Silicon Valley. We're in California. We're a border city that borders Mexico, and our downtown, interestingly, is closer to Mexico than it is to the northern parts of our county. And so we have such a close proximity. We're very, very kind of connected as a region. And so when we look at, and I grew up, as I mentioned, I grew up here in San Diego, and I have had the luxury of being able to cross the border all my life and be able to kind of live in northern Baja, kind of surfing and kind of spending all my time being able to explore the space down there and connect with the people and be able to, I've been to design conferences in Tijuana, and be able to kind of cross the border and really share this space together. We feel this is a really interesting and hidden place from a design perspective. And the reason why I say that is that we're known for our beaches and our weather and, the very touristy kind of things. But we're actually an interesting kind of design and innovation hub. There's a lot of great design that's happening here. There's a lot of great innovation and invention because of the universities that we have in our region, because of some of the technology companies that are based here and founded here. Qualcomm is one of those that has spent a lot of time with interesting IP that's kind of embedded in every mobile device, around the world. And Tijuana has been kind of an interesting and integral and really connected partner to us, in which we rely on each other so much that nobody really understands kind of that dynamic. A lot of the times on a global level, you hear about Washington and what Washington's perspective of the relationship between the US and Mexico is. We have a totally different perspective about that here in our region. We're a border town. We're one of the busiest border crossings in the world, based on kind of one of the things, with COVID has slowed that a little bit, but we've had some challenges there. But the dynamics of the merge of what San Diego and Tijuana is fascinating. It's very welcoming, and it's very different from LA and San Francisco and the other California cities that are here. And we're excited to share that with the world.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, can you talk maybe a little bit also on sort of maybe some certain design aspects that people should be aware of when it comes to the region, maybe, and maybe some of the highlights that I don't know if there is already sort of that mapped out, but aspect that maybe people are going to experience during the World Design Capital, or an important aspect to kind of keep an eye on when it comes to San Diego.
Yeah, it's within our region. I'm gonna back up and give you a little history, and then I'll kind of go forward. But in roughly 2014, Don Norman the kind of pseudo godfather of UX, as it's been coined, came back to San Diego and the University of California at San Diego, UCSD, and created a design lab, which is kind of this interesting kind of independent lab that sits between the business school, the medical school, performing arts, and some of the the information or some of the different disciplines that are going on there. That really kind of sparked with Don's kind of arrival, or kind of re-arrival. He was here in the 70s, I guess, 1970s, in the engineering program, cognitive science, and then moved on. Came back to San Diego and said, look, let's really kind of think about innovation and this interesting corner of the United States, and think about kind of another innovation hub, and using design as kind of a key pillar. So what is that type of design that we're really talking about? It was really all around and really focused on human-centered design at the ethos of what was happening. And Don didn't really know the design community, and because of my roots here, I just kind of invited myself into the lab and said, "Hey, Don, let's talk. Let's figure out what's going on here." Michelle Morris was the associate director of the design lab, and we all got together. And over the course of a couple of years, we established a new nonprofit called the Design Forward Alliance, which really was the essence to say, well, what can we do with design thinking and a human-centered approach to design that's already happening here in the industrial design, the medical devices. Is a big life sciences community here. We have a really, really large industry of life sciences and a lot of innovation that's happening, everything from Illumina to Dexcom to Tandem Diabetes. There's a variety of different companies that are really coming up and being kind of the forefront of medical devices, life sciences, and that being an interesting pillar of what was happening in design. That, along with some of the research in autonomous vehicles and some of the driving. Nissan has a design center here, and there's some other interesting things that are going on, come from a variety of different pockets, but there's these little sprinkling elements of design, from industrial to user experience, a large user experience group here in the user experience population, and a big population of independent designers, a lot of branding and creative kind of work in that space. So we brought it all together under the Design Forward Alliance and said, look, how can we bring all of these different communities together? And one that I didn't mention was architecture and urban planning, which was a big part of what the World Design Capital is all about as well. And the Design Forward Alliance, independent nonprofit, come together and said, how can we promote, advocate, and connect the community? And the community and really the things in the influence that we thought we could have, it was really on the business community, the education community, and the future of design education, as well as the local government. And the local government was the hardest one to really think about and crack in the process. But we set out to do that in 2016, and through that and through our efforts, we really kind of acted as a catalyst to bring the community together, and then say, what can we fundamentally do together as a community to celebrate what's going on here. And the World Design Capital bid and the World Design Organization based in Montreal had this endeavor. And so we said, we set out to say, if we do this, it's not about the designation and the year-long celebration of design in 2024. It's really about bringing the community together and seeing what we can do to experiment through design and with design in a variety of different pockets of the community. And as we always kind of come back to, is that the element of problem solving is at the roots of what great design is about. So we look at kind of this entire region, especially a binational perspective of it, to saying, if we can solve some interesting problems here and share those with the world, I think that we will succeed. And that's kind of a cool opportunity. So the next 2 years, as we plan for the World Design Capital 2024, we're going to be experimenting through a variety of different things, bringing more of what our learnings are, and then sharing those with the world as we invite the world to come to San Diego and Tijuana and see what we're all about in 2024. And there's a whole series of events that we'll be putting on. World Design Policy Conference. There's a variety of it's an entire month-long celebration of kind of a design festival and a variety of different things. If you're interested in the World Design Capital, Valencia right now is the current designee, and we're watching them closely. They've done a fantastic job through the pandemic on planning and preparing, and it's going to be exciting to see what they do over the remainder of 2022.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think maybe we can also provide some context for people what that exactly is, like World Design Capital. It's run by the VDO, World Design Organization, and it's basically started in 2008. If I'm not mistaken, and basically has the focus to basically highlight certain parts of the world, and basically the design heritage and sort of like the future thinking around design within this region. But maybe you can talk a little bit about that process as well, how that process worked out, and maybe some challenges around that.
Yeah, it's like an Olympic level bid, is what we found out.
The Olympics of design.
It's the Olympics of design, yeah. So we, as the Design Forward Alliance, as I was president for the first 4 years of the organization's existence, I stood in as president, and so we looked around. We took the design process to said, let's observe and understand kind of what's going on, in the region, and let's figure out whether or not we should do this. So the question of should we do this was top of mind, because we heard it. It was a kind of an inkling of an idea. Should we tackle this? This is going to be bold. Are we ready for this? Those are the questions that we were asking. So we kind of pulled the community. We brought a variety of different folks together, the design educators. We brought design firm and consultancy owners together. We brought a variety of the design associations. We had 14 different design associations, again, all different disciplines of design brought together. And then we looked at, other areas of the corporate design leaders in the area and said, for these different conversations, really, what can we do together as and leverage design in different ways? And then what should we do? And we came to a conclusion saying, what, let's go for this. Let's actually try to explore the opportunity of what the bid process was like, and took a year to pull together the data, the information, the understanding, the endorsements. So we had a variety of different endorsements from both private and public that we needed, funding, budgetary, organizational structure, and really kind of, preparing and providing a perspective and a point of view on why this is interesting to design, and why this is interesting to the World Design Organization, and why this could be an interesting conversation to have with the world. And a community-driven design approach, and the way that we bring these two countries, two cities, and two kind of community groups together as one, it was compelling as an argument. And so that whole year, we kicked off. We established a lead for the bid in February of 2020, and then March 2020, COVID hits, and we said, is this the time? Should we even, contemplate this? But we had already had our heads down. We just continued to push through and said, what, in addition to doing some things that the community needed at the time, which was, as a small business owners of the community, what are design leaders really thinking about? How are we challenged? How do we support each other? What does that really look like? And how do we fix this need? A variety of societal issues that were happening at the time, we were trying to support that as well. And in addition, trying to push this bid forward. And we ended up bringing an very interesting group together to not only create the bid, but also to create kind of this shortlisted experience. So we submitted the bid. We went through this shortlisting process. We found out we were one of the 2 finalists. So it was San Diego and Tijuana up against Moscow. And very, very different approaches to World Design Capital would look like in the regions. And what we did was we just took a very, very authentic approach. We brought the delegate down here to the region, showed him both Tijuana and San Diego, and showed it together, and showed our world-class venues that we have, this beautiful setting. They met hundreds and hundreds of people. And interestingly, if you visit Home, HOME, 2024.com. That's actually, we actually documented the entire itinerary of bringing the delegate in. And so you can see everything that was going on over the 2.5 days, which was exhausting, but very rewarding, with the crescendo being able to be on the waterfront, talking about the future of design. And it was just, still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. It was amazing. And finding out that we won the designation, and now the hard work starts. We have the next few years on preparing and planning and delivering on that, and doing it our way. It's going to be it'll probably be very different from Valencia. Cape Town had their own angle. Torino, Helsinki, everybody had kind of slightly different angle when they were the designee of the World Design Capital. And we're going to do it our own way as well. But we welcome the world to come visit and see what we're up to.
Yeah, really excited about that. I think it's interesting, right? If you look at design weeks, I think as sort of like a format that has been very established, and now sort of like design capitals, also how that process changes in context of COVID, or like the setup of that. For example, in the Munich Design Week, that actually had to move a couple of times, basically in the last 2 years because of it. Of course, right now we're looking in a much more optimistic future. If you're 2024, I think you can be optimistic there, I hope. But it's definitely interesting. And I think we're touching on different scales of design here. I think we first touched about like a design and a B2B relationship, and designing for businesses. We talked about the design of the human and humanity at large, that iterative process. And I think you had some interesting points, how basically that's also a design process. After all, designing basically within the community for such an event, and how to do that. So super interesting. I would love to continue talking to you, Scott, but I think we need to wrap it up because of time. So I'd just like to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the conversation. So we'll take it offline.
All right, that was the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments about your thoughts and biggest learnings from the episode. I'm always super curious about that. You can also tag me in a post about your biggest takeaway and share your insights with others to pass on your learnings. If the episode provided you a lot of value, make sure to follow, subscribe, and share it with friends and colleagues so they also have the chance to learn and grow. Until next time, cheers.